Here's the uncomfortable truth about money. Hard work doesn't create financial freedom. Leverage does, and leverage has nothing to do with effort. It has everything to do with who controls the conversation. If you don't control the frame, you're working inside someone else's rules. Lame. Let me start by telling you something most people in this room already sense but have never had confirmed. The world does not reward the best ideas. It rewards the ideas that control the frame. And if that statement makes you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is your old operating system realizing it may be obsolete. Every day, people with brilliant ideas lose to people with average ideas who understand one thing better than anyone else in the room: how attention works, how status works, how power actually moves. Not the fantasy version we were taught in school where logic wins and effort is always rewarded, but the real version, the one that plays out in boardrooms, negotiations, funding meetings, sales calls, and even relationships. Here's the hard truth. If you walk into a room trying to convince people, you've already lost. Convincing puts you in a lower status position. It frames you as the one seeking approval. And the moment you seek approval, the other side unconsciously moves into judgment mode. They stop listening for opportunity and start scanning for flaws. Their brains don't ask, "Is this a good idea?" They ask, "Why shouldn't I say no?" Human beings are not wired to accept ideas. They are wired to defend their own. This is not a flaw. It's survival. It's survival. Status, control, and certainty keep us alive. So when you push an idea directly at someone, their instinct is to push back, not because the idea is bad, but because accepting it would mean surrendering control. That's why the most powerful communicators never try to sell. They never try to persuade in the obvious way. They flip the script. They arrange the interaction so that the other person believes the idea originated in their own mind. And once that happens, resistance collapses. Because people will fight you to protect their ego, but they will defend their own conclusions to the death. I learned this the hard way. I didn't start as someone with power. I started as someone chasing it. Pitching, explaining, justifying. Doing all the things that feel logical and right and still watching deals fall apart for reasons no one could articulate. It's not the right time. Ooh, we need to think about it. Send me more details. Polite ways of saying you never had the frame. Here's the thing no one tells you about money, influence, or freedom. They are not granted. They are taken through positioning. The market does not reward effort. It rewards leverage. And leverage begins in the mind of the other person before it ever shows up on a term sheet or a bank account. Most people approach financial freedom the wrong way. They think in terms of accumulation, more income, more savings, more assets. But accumulation without control is fragile. One bad deal, one bad year, one bad decision, and it collapses. True financial freedom is not about how much you have. It's about how much you decide. About being the one who sets the rules of engagement. That's what frames are. Frames are invisible structures that decide who leads and who follows, whose time matters, whose reality dominates. And the shocking part is this. Frames exist whether you manage them or not. If you don't set the frame, someone else will, and they will set it in their favor. This is why so many smart, hardworking people feel stuck. They are playing inside frames designed by employers, markets, clients, even family expectations. They are operating logically inside someone else's game. And no matter how hard you work inside a bad frame, you cannot win it. The first principle you must understand is this. Status is not earned in the moment, it is perceived immediately. People decide your status before you finish your first sentence. They decide based on certainty, pace, boundaries, and whether you appear to need something from them. The person who needs less controls more. This is not arrogance. This is psychology. When you walk into a room needing approval, needing money, needing validation, the room feels it. You may not say it, but your behavior leaks it. You over-explain. You fill silence. You rush. You give away power without realizing it. And once status is lost, logic cannot recover it. High-status communicators do something counterintuitive. They slow down. They withhold. They create tension instead of relieving it. They don't chase attention. They filter it. And the moment you filter instead of chase, the power dynamic flips. And the other side is qualifying themselves to you. This is not manipulation. This is alignment with how the brain actually works. The human brain is a survival machine. It prioritizes novelty, scarcity, and authority. It devalues what is freely given and overvalues what must be earned. This is why desperate pitches fail and confident restraint attracts. Here's a principle that governs not just persuasion but wealth. Money flows towards certainty. Investors don't invest in ideas. They invest in people who appear inevitable. Customers don't buy products. They buy decisions that feel safe to commit to. And certainty is not loud. It is calm. It is structured. It is unbothered by rejection. When you master frames, rejection stops feeling personal because you are no longer seeking approval. You are testing alignment. That shift alone is worth more than most business strategies people spend years chasing. Once you stop needing yes, you gain leverage. Once you gain leverage, options appear. Once you have options, financial freedom becomes a strategic outcome, not a lottery ticket. Let me say this clearly because it matters. The goal is not to dominate people. The goal is to dominate the interaction. When interactions are structured correctly, outcomes follow naturally. You don't force decisions, you allow the brain to arrive at them comfortably. This is why the most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest or the smartest. It's the one who controls the frame without announcing it. The one who decides what the meeting is about, how time is used, what matters and what doesn't. That person shapes reality for everyone else. And here's the part most people miss. Once you understand this, you cannot unknow it. You begin to see why some people seem to move effortlessly through life while others struggle despite working harder. It's not luck, it's not morality, it's frame control. Financial independence at its highest level is not about escaping work. It's about escaping other people's frames. It's about choosing your constraints instead of inheriting them. And that begins the moment you stop explaining and start leading attention. In the next part, I'm going to break open how status games actually work, why logic fails under pressure, and how to flip power dynamics without aggression, manipulation, or deception. But for now, remember this. If you don't decide how people see you, they will decide for you. And they will not decide in your favor. Now let's talk about the thing everyone feels but almost no one understands clearly: status. Status is the silent force in every interaction. It decides who speaks, who waits, who explains, who evaluates. And the biggest mistake intelligent people make is believing status is tied to morality, fairness, or effort. It isn't. Status is perception, and perception is governed by biology, not intention. Your brain evolved to answer one question faster than any other: who's in charge here? Because in the wild, that question meant survival. Today, the stakes look different, but the circuitry hasn't changed. In meetings, negotiations, pitches, and relationships, the brain is still scanning for authority, certainty, and control. And it does this before logic even wakes up. This is why logical arguments fail so often. Logic requires attention. Attention is only given once status is resolved. If the other side unconsciously places you lower in the hierarchy, your data, your numbers, your brilliance simply don't land. They bounce off a closed system. You think you're making progress because you're talking. But talking is not influence. High-status individuals understand something instinctively. They never try to raise their status directly. That would signal need. Instead, they behave in ways that assume status. They don't rush. They don't overanswer. They don't chase agreement. They allow silence to do the heavy lifting. Silence used correctly is one of the most expensive tools in the room. When you fill silence, you signal anxiety. When you tolerate silence, you signal control. Control is intoxicating to the human brain. It creates safety, and safety is what allows decisions to happen. This is where most people sabotage their financial outcomes. They enter conversations with urgency. They need the deal, the job, the approval. And the moment you need something, the frame flips. Now you're operating inside someone else's reality. Your timeline becomes less important. Your terms become negotiable. Your leverage evaporates. Leverage does not come from wanting less money. It comes from needing less validation. When you stop needing the outcome, you gain the ability to shape the process. And the process is where outcomes are decided. Let me give you a frame that governs wealth creation at the highest level. Money follows power, not effort. Power is the ability to say no and mean it. Power is the ability to walk away without emotional leakage. Power is having multiple options because you've positioned yourself, not because you got lucky. People chase income because they don't understand leverage. They trade time for money because they don't control frames. Once you control frames, time stops being your primary asset. Decision-making becomes your asset. Positioning becomes your asset. Scarcity becomes your asset. Scarcity is not about pretending you don't care. It's about genuinely structuring your life so that opportunities compete for you. That doesn't happen through hustle. It happens through selectivity, through boundaries, through standards. High-status people do not explain their standards. They enforce them quietly. The moment you feel the urge to justify why you deserve something, you've already framed yourself as the one being evaluated. Evaluation is power. Never forget that. Now let's talk about frames more precisely, because this is where the game is actually played. A frame is simply the context that defines meaning. Same facts, different frame, completely different outcome. Frames decide what matters, what doesn't, and who gets to decide. There are frames everywhere. The time frame, the expert frame, the moral frame, the economic frame, the relationship frame. Most people walk into interactions blind to which frame is operating, and when you don't see the frame, you are inside it. The most common losing frame is the supplicant frame. It sounds like enthusiasm. It feels like passion, but it communicates, I need this more than you do, and once that message is sent, everything that follows is uphill. The winning alternative is the prize frame. In this frame, you are not trying to win approval. You are evaluating fit. You are seeing whether the other side qualifies to work with you. This does not require arrogance. It requires clarity. Clarity about your value. Clarity about your standards. Clarity about your boundaries. When you operate from the prize frame, conversations change. Questions change. Energy changes. Suddenly, the other side is explaining themselves. They're filling silence. They're justifying timelines. They're leaning forward. And none of this happened because you pushed harder. It happened because you stopped chasing. Here's a principle that governs persuasion and wealth simultaneously. People don't move toward opportunity. They move away from tension. The skilled communicator knows how to create productive tension. Not anxiety, not pressure, but unresolved curiosity. Strategic incompleteness. Space for the other person's brain to engage. This is why over-explaining kills deals. When you explain everything, you remove tension. When you remove tension, you remove engagement. Engagement is where ownership forms. And ownership is what makes people commit. Financially free individuals understand this deeply. They don't try to close everyone. They let most people disqualify themselves. This is counterintuitive, but powerful. Because the act of choosing filters the audience, and filtered audiences value what remains. Let me reframe something that might challenge you. Selling is not about getting someone to say yes. It's about making no feel uncomfortable for the right reason. When your value is clear, your standards are visible, and your confidence is calm, walking away feels costly to the other side. This applies far beyond business. It applies to partnerships, careers, investments, even personal relationships. The person who can walk away cleanly controls the direction of the relationship. Emotional independence is not coldness, it is leverage. Now, let's connect this to financial freedom directly. Most people think financial freedom means escaping pressure. In reality, it means choosing your pressure. It means deciding which games are worth playing and which aren't. And that choice is only available to those who control frames. Debt is not just a financial issue. It's a psychological one. So is burnout. So is under-earning. They all come from long-term submission to frames you didn't design. The moment you accept someone else's urgency, someone else's valuation, someone else's timeline, you are renting your life out cheaply. Reclaiming control starts with micro-decisions. How quickly you respond. How much you explain. Whether you tolerate disrespect disguised as a business. Whether you allow people to waste your time. Time is the clearest signal of status. Who waits for whom matters more than most people realize. High-status individuals protect their time aggressively, not because they're busy, but because time protection signals value, and value attracts resources. Well, this is not theory. This is observable reality. Here's a quote I'll paraphrase because it captures the essence of this entire discipline. The moment you try to persuade, you lose power. The moment you allow others to persuade themselves, you gain it. This is not manipulation. This is alignment with human nature. In the next part, I'm going to show you exactly how people make decisions under pressure, why the rational brain comes last, and how to structure interactions so that agreement feels inevitable rather than forced. But for now, understand this. You don't need better ideas. You need better positioning. And positioning begins the moment you stop asking for permission. Now let's dismantle one of the most dangerous myths ever taught to intelligent people. The idea that humans make decisions rationally. They don't. Logic is not the driver. Logic is the justification that shows up after the decision has already been made. And once you understand this, you stop wasting your time trying to convince people with facts when their brains are busy protecting status, certainty, and safety. Inside every person you speak to, there are competing systems. One is fast, emotional, instinctive. It decides in milliseconds whether something is safe, threatening, dominant, or weak. The other is slow, analytical, and effortful. It likes spreadsheets, explanations, and reasoning. Most people speak directly to the second system and wonder why nothing moves. That's because the first system already said no. The fast system doesn't care how smart you are. It cares whether you are confident, controlled, and worth listening to. It asks questions like, is this person certain? Are they calm under pressure? Do they seem like they need something from me? Can I safely follow them? If the answers aren't right, the analytical system never even gets invited into the room. This is why pressure kills deals. Pressure signals desperation. Desperation signals low status. Low status triggers avoidance. And once avoidance is triggered, logic cannot recover the interaction. You can add slides, data, testimonials. It won't matter. You're solving the wrong problem. High-level communicators do something radically different. They manage attention before they deliver information. They slow the interaction down. They break patterns. They reset expectations. They understand that whoever controls attention controls the decision. This is the origin of real persuasion, not pushing ideas, but guiding focus. Not demanding agreement, but shaping perception. Here's something you may find comfortable but true. People don't want to be convinced. They want to feel smart. They want to feel smart. They want to feel like they saw the opportunity before anyone else. They want to feel in control. And the moment you present an idea as something they must accept, you rob them of that feeling. So the most powerful move you can make is to withhold, to suggest rather than explain, to imply rather than declare, to leave space for the other person's brain to complete the picture. When people fill in the gaps themselves, ownership forms, and ownership is what creates commitment. This is why storytelling beats explanation every time. A story bypasses resistance. It doesn't demand belief. It invites curiosity. It allows the listener to arrive at conclusions organically. That arrival feels personal, and people protect what feels personal. Now let's connect this directly to money and freedom, because this is where the gap between theory and results shows up. People who struggle financially often believe they need more information, more strategies, more tactics. In reality, they need more control over how they are perceived. They need authority before opportunity. Authority is not declared. It is demonstrated through behavior, through pacing, through boundaries, through what you choose not to react to. The moment you stop reacting emotionally to outcomes, you gain leverage, because leverage belongs to the calmest person in the room. Think about negotiations. The person who talks the most loses. The person who rushes loses. The person who reveals urgency loses. Why? Because urgency collapses optionality, and optionality is power. Financially independent people protect optionality at all costs. They do not commit early. They do not reveal preference prematurely. They let others lean in. This is not manipulation. This is discipline. Let me reframe persuasion in a way that aligns with reality. Persuasion is not about influence. It's about removal of obstacles. When people resist, it's rarely because they don't understand. It's because accepting the idea threatens their identity. Your job is not to overpower that resistance, but to dissolve it. This is why arguing is pointless. Arguments escalate status battles, and status battles distract from outcomes. When you argue, you frame the interaction as conflict. Conflict activates defense. Defense shuts down openness. The higher move is to reframe, to shift the context so the resistance no longer makes sense, to make the old position feel misaligned with the person's own goals. When that happens, change feels self-directed rather than imposed. This is the skill that separates closers from explainers, leaders from managers, free people from trapped ones. Now let's talk about certainty, because certainty is the currency of leadership and wealth. Certainty does not mean knowing everything. It means being comfortable with uncertainty. It means moving forward without needing constant reassurance. People follow certainty because it feels safe even when outcomes are unknown. Ironically, certainty grows when you detach from results. The more you need a specific outcome, the less certain you appear. The less you need it, the more solid you become. The more solid you become. This is why financial independence begins psychologically before it ever shows up financially. When you no longer need every deal to work, you negotiate better. When you no longer fear rejection, you choose better opportunities. When you no longer chase validation, your value increases. This is not motivational talk. This is observable behavior economics. There's a principle I live by, paraphrased here. The strongest negotiating position is indifference combined with clarity. Indifference without clarity looks lazy. Clarity without indifference looks needy. Together, they look powerful. This balance is what allows people to flip scripts in real time. When a conversation starts going the wrong way, they don't panic. They pause. They reset. They change frames. They understand that conversations are not linear. They are dynamic. And whoever adapts fastest controls direction. Most people freeze when pressure appears. They cling to scripts. They explain harder. They repeat points. That's because they don't understand the game they're playing. They think they're exchanging information when in reality they're navigating perception. Once you see this, everything changes. Job interviews become evaluations in both directions. Sales calls become mutual filters. Investor meetings become alignment tests. Even personal boundaries become easier to enforce because you're no longer asking, you're deciding. Here's the deeper financial principle underneath all of this. Wealth is attracted to clarity, not need. Opportunities move toward people who know what they want and what they won't tolerate. Confusion repels. Desperation repels. Over-explanation repels. This is why some people seem to have deals, partnerships, and chances land in their lap. It's not luck. It's the signal they broadcast. A signal of self-trust, of selectivity, of calm authority. In the next part, I'm going to show you how to deliberately create that signal, how to handle resistance without force, how to neutralize power plays, and how to turn objections into momentum without defending yourself. But for now, remember this: the fastest way to lose power is to try to prove you deserve it. The fastest way to gain power is to act as though you already decide. Now let's talk about resistance, because the moment you begin to control frames, resistance doesn't disappear, it changes shape. It becomes subtle. It hides behind questions, delays, logic, and reasonable concerns. And if you don't recognize it for what it is, you'll step right back into the lower status position without realizing it. Resistance is not opposition. Resistance is uncertainty trying to regain control. When someone resists, it's rarely because they disagree with your idea. It's because accepting it would force them to give up the frame they're currently standing in. And people protect frames the way they protect identity. This is where most people panic. They hear resistance and rush to explain. They defend, they justify, they argue, and the instant they do that, the frame flips. Now they are reacting instead of leading. Now they are inside the other person's reality, and the deal, financial, professional, relational, begins to slip. High-level operators never fight resistance head-on. They let it expose itself. They slow down. They ask calibrated questions. They acknowledge without agreeing. And most importantly, they never chase resolution prematurely. Resolution is power. Whoever pushes hardest for closure signals need. Think about this for a moment. When someone says, "I need to think about it," most people hear rejection. But that's not rejection. That's a request for safety. The wrong response is to push. The right response is to regain the frame. Instead of defending your position, you redirect attention. You might say something as simple as, "That makes sense," and then go silent. Silence here is not passive, it's strategic. It forces the other side to fill the gap. And when they do, they often reveal the real concern: status, timing, risk, or control. This is one of the most important principles you can internalize. The person who speaks next gives up information. Information is leverage, and leverage compounds. This is why high-status individuals are comfortable with discomfort. They don't rush to make things feel better. They understand that tension is not danger. Tension is engagement. When you remove tension too early, you remove decision-making energy. Let's talk about time, because time is the most underestimated frame in every interaction. Whoever controls the timeline controls the outcome. Deadlines are not neutral, they are weapons, and most people let others use them against them. If someone imposes urgency on you, the instinctive response is to comply or resist emotionally. Both are mistakes. The higher move is to reframe time entirely, to make it clear, calmly, confidently, that your timeline is not reactive. Financially independent people never rush because they don't have to, but more importantly, they signal that they don't have to. This signal alone filters out bad deals, weak partners, and low-quality opportunities. Speed is not power. Control is. When someone senses that you are willing to walk away, time pressure loses its bite. Suddenly they become flexible. Suddenly urgency softens. Why? Because the frame is shifted. They are now invested in keeping the interaction alive. Here's a paraphrase principle that governs this dynamic. The deal happens when the other side feels they might lose access to you, not when you push harder, not when you add incentives. Access is value. Scarcity of access multiplies value. So, this applies not just to deals, but to careers and income growth. People who are always available, always responsive, always agreeable rarely command premium compensation. People who are selective, bounded, and calm do. This isn't about playing games. It's about signaling self-respect and confidence. Now let's address power plays directly. Interruptions, challenges, dominance displays. These moments intimidate most people because they feel personal. They aren't. They're tests. And tests are opportunities. When someone challenges you aggressively, they're not asking for information. They're probing status. The wrong response is to escalate emotionally or retreat. The correct response is to stay grounded and redirect. You don't match intensity. You don't explain more, you slow down. You acknowledge the challenge without conceding ground. You might even reframe the challenge as evidence of interest. This flips the dynamic instantly. Power does not come from overpowering. It comes from composure. The calmest person in the room always wins long term because calm signals confidence and confidence attracts alignment. This composure is not natural, it's trained. It comes from understanding that rejection, delay, and resistance are not threats, they are data. And people who treat interactions as data-gathering exercises rather than emotional events rise quickly. This is why emotional regulation is one of the most underrated financial skills in existence. People lose fortunes not because they lack intelligence, but because they react instead of respond. They negotiate emotionally. They invest emotionally. They commit emotionally. Emotion narrows perception. Narrow perception destroys leverage. When you regulate emotion, options expand. An alignment cannot be argued into existence. It must be revealed. Financially free individuals do not try to be liked by everyone. They try to be respected by the right people. And respect grows from consistency, from predictable standards. From the quiet confidence that says, "This is how I operate without apology." Here's a principle that separates those who scale influence from those who stay stuck. Consistency of frame beats intensity of effort. You don't need to dominate every interaction. You need to show up the same way every time. Calm, selective, clear. Over time, the market adjusts to you. This is why people who control frames tend to attract higher quality partners, clients, and opportunities. Not because they're louder, but because they're legible. Others know what to expect. And certainty reduces friction. Now let's talk about identity, because identity is the deepest frame of all. If you see yourself as someone who needs approval, you will unconsciously leak it. If you see yourself as someone who brings value, you will act accordingly. And behavior always reveals belief. Changing identity is not about affirmations. It's about behavior under pressure. When stakes rise, who do you become? Do you explain more or less? Do you speed up or slow down? Do you protect boundaries or sacrifice them? These moments reveal the true frame you live inside. This is where financial behavior mirrors communication behavior. People who overspend often overexplain. People who panic sell often panic talk. People who chase returns often chase validation. These patterns are not random. They are expressions of the same underlying frame. Financial freedom requires emotional neutrality. Not indifference, but regulation. The ability to observe without reacting. to wait without anxiety, to choose without urgency. This neutrality allows you to see opportunities others miss because they're too emotionally invested to notice. Let me reframe wealth for you one more time. Wealth is stored decision-making capacity. It's the ability to say no today so you can say yes tomorrow. It's the ability to walk away from short-term gain in favor of long-term positioning. It's the ability to remain calm when others are frantic. This is why people with frame control often appear lucky. They aren't. They simply see more clearly because they aren't reacting emotionally to every signal. They wait. They filter. They let alignment come to them. Another overlooked truth: the best deals are quiet. They don't announce themselves loudly. They don't come with urgency or hype. They appear when trust, competence, and timing converge, and they go to people who are prepared to recognize them. Prepared means positioned. Positioned means framed. This is also why social circles matter more than most strategies. People at similar frame levels recognize each other instinctively. They speak the same language. They respect boundaries. They don't need to posture much. And once you enter these circles, opportunities compound naturally. You don't get invited into these environments by asking. You get invited by behaving as though you already belong, not arrogantly, but confidently, not loudly, but clearly. Here's a paraphrased truth that governs long-term influence. You don't rise by convincing others of your value. You rise by consistently acting from it. Over time, the market adjusts. People recalibrate expectations. And suddenly, what once felt impossible feels normal. This is how frame control becomes lifestyle design. You stop reacting to the world and start shaping it. You choose fewer, better games. You engage more deeply. You earn more not because you chase money, but because money follows leverage. In the final part, I'm going to tie everything together: how to live inside the prize frame permanently, how to protect it under pressure, and how to pass it on so that your influence outlasts individual wins. But for now, remember this: the ultimate luxury is not money. It is choice. And choice belongs to those who control frames, not those who plead inside them. Now we bring it all together, because if this stays theoretical, it's useless. The point of mastering frames is not to win conversations. It's to design a life where you are no longer negotiating your worth, your time, or your direction. Where you operate from a position of choice so consistently that pressure stops feeling threatening and starts feeling optional. The highest level of frame control is not something you perform. It's something you become. At that level, you are no longer switching tactics based on situation. Your behavior is coherent across contexts: work, money, relationships, opportunity. They all respond to the same signal you broadcast. That signal is simple but rare: I decide. People misunderstand this. They think deciding means dominating others. It doesn't. It means taking responsibility for structure, for boundaries, for pace, for standards. And once you do that internally, the external world reorganizes itself around you. The prize frame, when fully integrated, is not about ego. It's about stewardship. You treat your attention, energy, and time as scarce resources because they are. You don't waste them explaining yourself to people who haven't earned access. You don't rush into commitments to relieve discomfort. You don't accept urgency that isn't aligned with your values. This is where most people break. Not because they don't understand the ideas, but because pressure exposes identity. When stakes rise, they revert to old patterns. They chase approval. They speed up. They soften boundaries. And the frame collapses. Protecting the prize frame under pressure, the real work. Pressure will come disguised as opportunity, as flattery, as fear, as artificial deadlines, as social expectations, and each time you will feel the internal pull to compromise clarity for comfort. That moment is the test. That moment decides whether this is a philosophy or a lifestyle. Here's the truth: every time you violate your own standards, you train the world to do the same. And every time you hold them calmly, without drama, you raise the level of engagement around you. Financially free people are not fearless. They are regulated. They feel pressure, but they don't obey it automatically. They pause, they assess, they decide. That pause alone is power. Wealth at its core is delayed reaction. It's the ability to not act on impulse, financially, emotionally, socially. Most people remain trapped not because they lack opportunity, but because they cannot tolerate the discomfort of waiting. Waiting is a skill. And like all skills, it can be trained. This is why I say financial freedom is psychological before it's numerical. If you cannot say no to people, you will never say no to bad deals. If you cannot tolerate silence, you will overpay for certainty. If you cannot walk away cleanly, you will always negotiate from weakness. The market senses this instantly. Now let's talk about legacy, because the final frame is not about you. It's about what outlasts you. Influence that ends with you is fragile. Influence that transfers is power. When you live inside the prize frame consistently, you don't need to teach it explicitly. Others absorb it by proximity. They see how you move, how you decide, how you don't react, how you don't chase, and they recalibrate their own behavior accordingly. This is how leaders are made without speeches. This is how cultures form. This is how families, teams, and organizations rise in standard without constant enforcement. People don't remember what you said. They remember how you made decisions under pressure. If you want to pass this on to partners, children, teams, the key is modeling, not instruction. Let them see you walk away from misaligned money. Let them see you protect time. Let them see you choose long-term positioning over short-term relief. Those moments teach more than any explanation ever could. Here's a paraphrased principle that governs this final level. Power that needs to be announced is already fading. Power that is embodied doesn't need validation. This is where persuasion becomes invisible, where money becomes a byproduct, where freedom stops being something you chase and starts being something you live inside. And let me be very clear about something before we close. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming intentional. You can be generous without being weak. You can be kind without being available. You can be ambitious without being desperate. The strongest people I know are not aggressive. They are grounded. They don't raise their voice. They don't explain their worth. They don't hurry. They choose. That choice, repeated over years, is what builds unshakable financial independence. Not luck, not hustle, not constant motion, but calm, consistent frame control. If there's one final idea I want you to carry with you, it's this: the world is always negotiating with you. The only question is whether you realize it. Every interaction either reinforces your frame or erodes it. Every decision either compounds leverage or leaks it. You don't need to dominate every room. You need to never abandon yourself in one. Once you understand that, money becomes lighter. Work becomes strategic. Relationships become cleaner. And life stops feeling like a performance you have to maintain and starts feeling like a position you occupy. That is what it means to flip the script, not just in conversations, but in how you live.